Well, good evening. Good evening. My name is Jerry Gale, and welcome to an evening with Jim Wallis. Welcome to all of you here in person, and then welcome to about 100 more that's live streaming this, probably around the state of Minnesota. After Jim's presentation, we'll have a Q&A. You received a card as you came in. If you could just write down the question on that card, hold it up, and one of the ushers will come and take that from you and bring it down to the questioning table. And you can write the question right now. You don't have to wait until the presentation's over. And those of you that are online, there's a button on your screen that says Submit a Question. And so if you click it, you can submit a question. So this event is sponsored by Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church and Christians Against Christian Nationalism in Minnesota. I'm a member here, but I also started Christians Against Christian Nationalism in Minnesota. I want to give you a little bit of information about that organization. So Christians Against Christian Nationalism is an initiative of the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty. And they started in 1936. In 2019, BJC recognized that there was a threat from Christian nationalism, so they created the website Christians Against Christian Nationalism, and you have to give them some credit for recognizing that and creating the website 2 years before January 6, 2021. Amanda Tyler is the executive director of BJC, and she emphasizes two important points. Christian nationalism is a threat to both democracy and to Christianity. And the second point she emphasizes is that for the fight against Christian nationalism to be successful, it needs to be led by Christians so that it is not seen as anti-Christian. And that pretty much sums up why we're all here, I think. So with their blessing and support, I started Christians Against Christian Nationalism in Minnesota in January of this year. BJC created an email invitation, and then 3 organizations helped send that email to the metro area: BJC, Faithful America, and Vote Common Good. And if you want to learn more about what this is all about, I really encourage you to go visit Faithful America's website. On January 17th, we had our first meeting here in the church in the basement. I was really hoping for 20 or 30 people. Over 100 people showed up. Then in February, we had a Zoom call. And once again, we created an email, and the 3 organizations sent it out to all of Minnesota, because the second meeting was going to be a Zoom meeting. And so we want to make sure that we are reaching out to greater Minnesota. The second meeting, we had about 100 people on Zoom, and about 20% of them were from outside of the metro area. Based on discussions I've had with people involved in this group, we've kind of decided on we've decided on 3 objectives. The first objective is improve communication and coordination among Minnesota Christians that are concerned about Christian nationalism. So a year ago, a church in Minnetonka that was concerned about Christian nationalism didn't realize there was a church in Stillwater that had the same concern. And there wasn't a whole lot of discussion going on between the Methodists and the Lutherans and the Presbyterians and even the Catholics at St. Joan of Arc. So and now we're starting to have those discussions. So the second objective is for us to be a resource for churches who are wrestling with Christian nationalism. And an excellent recommendation we can give to a church is for them to start a book group to read and discuss a book about Christian nationalism. And there's many excellent books that have been written in the last 4 years. I've read a number of them. But in my opinion, the best book by far for a church book group to read and discuss is a book by Jim. And I think after tonight you'll agree. So our third objective is to provide kind of disaster preparedness when Christian nationalism unexpectedly strikes Minnesota. We want to be able to build an organization that can respond and react. For example, we should be able to organize a large group to protest if General Flynn brings the Reawakening American Tour to Minneapolis. On the flip side of the coin, we should be able to seize an unexpected opportunity to stand up for Christianity based on loving your neighbor. For example, just imagine that 3 weeks ago, we find out that Jim Wallis is going to be in town and he's willing to do a book signing. Can we organize a book signing for a Tuesday evening? And thanks to all of you and to the communications department at Hennepin Church, we did it. And so, if we can do this, we should be able to do many other things to fight Christian nationalism. So if you want more information about this group, I'll be in the lobby afterwards. I'd like to invite Pastor Elizabeth McCauley to come up to welcome you and to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. It is wonderful to have you here. You bless this space, and I'm so glad to be in ministry with you all in this city. Truth. I got this information from the Georgetown University website because I figured they would know what they were talking about. Jim Wallis is a writer, a teacher, a preacher, and a justice advocate who believes the gospel of Jesus must be emancipated from its cultural and political captivities. He's a New York Times bestselling author, a public theologian, a preacher, and a commentator on ethics and public life. He's the inaugural holder of the Chair in Faith and Justice and the founding director of the Georgetown University Center on Faith and Justice. In 2022, Washingtonian Magazine named Wallis one of 500 most influential people shaping policy in D.C. and beyond. He was raised in a Midwestern evangelical family. As a teenager, Wallis questioned the racial segregation in his church and community, which led him to black churches and neighborhoods of inner-city Detroit. He spent his student years involved in the civil rights and anti-war movements at Michigan State University. He is the founder of Sojourners and is the author of 12 books and the host of the popular podcast, The Soul of the Nation. He served on President Obama's White House Advisory Council on faith-based and neighborhood partnerships and has taught faith and public life courses at Harvard and Georgetown University. He also serves as a research fellow at the Georgetown University Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Wallis has previously taught at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and was awarded an honorary doctorate in humane letters from Georgetown University. He is a coach, served for 22 seasons as a Little League coach for his 2 baseball-playing sons, and I didn't know this bit, but I'm going to share it. His wife, Joy Carol Wallis, was one of the first female priests in the Church of England, and upon whom the title character of the BBC show, The Vicar of Dibley, was based. Come on. She's in our midst. Where are you, Joy? As a pastor, as a preacher, as a public theologian, I was sharing with Jim that his work and the work of Sojourners has emboldened my preaching, and I have felt less alone in being a prophetic public theologian. So I hope you will join me in thanking this good man for the work that he continues to do. Welcome.
Good evening. In 3 weeks, pretty good, Jerry. I always love coming to these twin cities. It's always a blessing to me for all kinds of reasons. But I want to start tonight with the issue of time. You hear it. This is a crucial time. You've heard that, right? Critical time. Urgent time. I did the National Cathedrals podcast last night. It's called Crossroads. Crossroads time. Critical. Urgent. Unprecedented. All those words we hear about time right now. So let me start with some biblical language for time. Two kinds of time in the Bible. Chronos time, which is normal tick-tock time, incremental change, normal time. Even elections tend to follow normal cycles, time frames. But the other word in the Bible for time is called Kairos time. How many of you have heard of that? Kairos time, Kairos is abnormal time. Kairos time changes time. Kairos are those moments when things change that could change a lot of things for a long time. Decades, even generations. I want us to understand tonight that as people of faith, we are living in a Kairos time. Kairos time. I want to have a conversation tonight. And then I want to talk about how to take that conversation out into the streets of this country, to our congregations. I don't want anyone to walk away saying, finally a good talk about faith and politics. No, we're going to talk about taking a conversation into the streets of this nation, because the faith factor in this election season, the faith factor could be decisive, one way or another. Jerry is patient and persistent. This brother, I've got so many emails from this brother, and I love your persistency. So let's start. And Amanda Tyler, who you work with, was on our faith table call on Friday, about 50 faith leaders in this nation, about Christians against Christian nationalism, for all the good reasons you laid out. So let's just start there for a moment. What's wrong with it? I mean, well, you take the most welcoming, inclusive, inviting vision in the history of the planet, and you make it white. White Christian nationalism. I mean, think of it, this vision that has brought more people together than any other vision on the planet becomes white, or most of all, for white people. Christian, but they don't mean service, sacrifice, love. They mean control, dominance, dominion. And nationalists. Now, I've been on the road a lot in these last few months, and one place I was, a very nervous introducer said, Jim founded Sojourners in 1871. So the whole evening was jokes about how old I am, right? So I came back and said, well, I wasn't there at the ascension of Christ, but I read about it. And what he said was, I want you to go into all the world, making disciples of every nation, teaching them to observe everything I've taught you. Nationalist? Really? It's bad religion. It's false. It's a false white gospel. Now the problem is, A lot of people think that the answer to bad religion is no religion. And I want to admit, there are days when I think that too. To be honest, there are days when our religion is so bad, so stupid, so ugly, so oppressive. It makes even me want to say, maybe it's better just not to deal with this. A lot of my students think that. When I went to Georgetown, most of my students would categorize themselves as the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They put none of the above in the affiliation box. So I get to Georgetown, I say, I love the nuns. And the sister says, we love you too. I said, well, I do love you nuns too. In fact, when Sojourners was starting, I would go out on the road to very conservative Christian colleges, even in places like Minnesota. And there'd be 2 rows of sisters in the front row of the chapel, the auditorium. And I'd say, sisters, what are you doing here? They'd say, well, we're local, Jim. I said, well, I figured that, but why here? Jim, this is a very conservative place. We thought somebody should have your back. So I've had nuns for bodyguards for years, right? But it's the other nuns that I talk to now all the time. And they wonder about religion. Now the nuns, if you study that, it's not a secular movement. Most believe in God, these young people, or something bigger than themselves. But they are watching how we respond right now in this Kairos time. So we're facing a crisis, a test of democracy, which a lot of you could describe in great detail, a test of faith, but it's also a test for a new generation. Because if we don't stand up and speak up and act, they're never going to show up at our churches again. They're watching. They're paying attention to what we say and do in these days ahead. This is so much deeper than just politics. Let's take that dominionist theology. Trump didn't invent that. It's old. It goes back to pre-founding of this nation. They had this idea that Christianity, with white Europeans, would come here and take over. Papal bulls said that. I've wondered, papal bulls, I don't want to go there. But to come and to try to erase an indigenous population and take all their land from them. Cotton Mather said, we have to bring Jesu to overcome all the Satanists in this new land. That's what he said. That's about as bold as any papal bull I ever heard. Then we kidnapped a whole population of Africans and made them into chattel slavery. Brutal chattel slavery. I mean, free land and free labor, that made America great. Think about it. Pretty good start. I call it America's original sin, but it is making a comeback. America's original sin, which is more than slavery, it's a racial hierarchy of human values. White's most important. In my classes, I often say, okay, we were doing the founding documents one day, and I said, now, who are the founding documents for? And a big class full of very diverse students, I said, Any of you white guys here own a house? And the 2 or 3 white guys there didn't own houses. I said, well, it wasn't for you either. It was for me. The whole thing was for me. I'm a white guy who owns a house. I'm a property owner. It wasn't for any of the rest of you. None. Just me. So the whole idea is to make this also for all of you. All of us. We stand on the brink of the possibility of a genuine multiracial democracy, and that's why they're so upset. We're right on the edge. It could be possible like never before. Right on the edge. They're saying, no way. White supremacy is making a comeback. This is its gasp of death, and they will win by any means necessary. It's making a comeback. Dominionist theology, old bad religion. It's a heresy. I'm in church, I could say. White Christian nationalism is an idolatry. It's an idol. False religion. Worship of wealth, money, power. It's an idolatry. Let me get clear. The phrase white Christianity, just the words, it's an idolatry. White evangelical, white Christian. What defines the phrases is not evangelical, Christianity, or Christian. What the word that defines the phrases is white. Whiteness is an idolatry. False religion. However, Jesus says, you'll know the truth, and the truth will what? Make you free. That's interesting. Free, okay. So I took 6 biblical texts after we got done with white Christian nationalism and dominionist theology and all that. 6 biblical texts that could maybe bring us back and carry us forward. That's what this book is mostly about. There are better books on white Christian nationalism. They're all referenced here. But one of them is this text by Jesus. And so I took these texts that we know, they're familiar, you know them, I knew them, and I wrestled with them, and more commentators, and prayed over them, and what do they mean right now? And with that one, that text from Jesus, it struck me. I finally got it. The opposite of truth isn't lies, it's captivity. You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And when we don't know the truth, we're captive. A whole lot of people in this country, I'll be blunt, a whole lot of white people. And some people of color too, but are captive. Are they all bad people, horrible? No, they're not all bad people. Some are otherwise sometimes kind of good people, but they're captive to lies. They're captive. They're sold out to lies. We got 3 groups of people who want to control this election. One whole group are people who are literally captive to lies. They believe it all. They believe all the lies. 2 other groups, one are politicians who know the lies aren't true, but they want to be vice president. Or they want their careers to have a flourishing future. They know their lies, but they've attached their agendas and their egos and their success to the lies. They know that. But I'm going to benefit from the lies. 3rd group, money people. The money people, the ones who run this economy. because their candidate says, hey, I'll make you even richer. I promise. I'll cut those taxes more. I'll cut those regulations. I'm going to make you richer. 3 groups. People who are captive to lies, those who just want to take power, and those just want to make more money. It's deeper than all that, because while Trump is the master of grievance, I can't calculate the results and outcomes of grievance in 5 months in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. I'm not sure here, but it looks a little less dangerous here, but that could change too. But it's deeper than grievance. Every nation has its better angels and its worst demons. Every nation. Donald Trump is a manipulator of our worst demons. The worst of who we are isn't just grievance, it's our worst. There's our better angels, our worst demons, and our demons of race run so deep in this country. Do our better angels have a chance? That's the question. People expect me to know what's going to happen. It's amazing. And I don't know. But the worst demons can win. They've won before. They're in a better position now to win than ever before. And our whole electoral system is so skewed to the elites, it's not majoritarian democracy. I'm being blunt tonight, even in church. Donald Trump's not going to win the popular vote in this country. He's not. Doesn't matter. Only a little bit, margins here and there in 4 or 5 states, will decide if our worst demons win. And there's no apologies about, there's no hiding what they say they're going to do. They're telling us. Pay attention. 8 million immigrants are going to be rounded up, put in camps, and deported. The Justice Department becomes a personal lawyer. Civil service is gutted. Executive power even can overturn legislation. And I've been doing this now around the country for a while, and what I'm struck by is on the sort of the liberal progressive side, we run around, and in our media we run around every day just saying how wrong they are. Facts, facts, facts. Lies, lies, lies. And we just talk to each other, and we're just talking to each other. We're living in 2 separate universes of facts and information in this country. 2 worlds where the same facts don't apply. And when MSNBC shows this was a lie, they all like that, that settles it. It doesn't settle it. Lies are winning. The trajectory of politics now is fear to hate to violence. That's our trajectory. And what I've realized lately is that's on the side that I'm fighting all the time, but on the side that I'm on, I hear mostly also fear about speaking out. But I'll get so many emails from my congregation. The head of a national church, the head of a national church, the head of a national church, I had lunch with last week with a few of those folks who are friends, and said, I won't tell what denomination. Pastors are writing me and saying they're getting in trouble for even preaching from scriptures without naming candidates or any candidate or politics, but they're preaching from scriptures that they're accused of this scripture implies a critique of one of the candidates. This scripture implies a critique of one of the candidates. What was the scripture, says the bishop? The Beatitudes. It does imply critiques of all of us. So this is a Kairos time. Now, if I didn't think that there weren't persuadable people still, I wouldn't have written the book. I think there are still persuadable people. How we can persuade is something we should talk about in the Q&A time. But every movement has to figure out who they can persuade and who they must defeat. Now, let me be clear, I'm in church, non-violently. Jim Lawson just died, my mentor and hero from the Civil Rights Movement. Taught me and lots of us about nonviolence. I believe in nonviolence. But I mean defeat at the ballot box. There are religious power brokers who are using religion for power. The words that we love and care about, they're using for power, and those power brokers must be defeated. And we must help defeat them. This book is hopefully some tools for persuading and defeating. Gary Wills says in the back here, using religion to bless hate is the supreme blasphemy. If you don't believe that, read this book. I wasn't going to say that last part. So, that text, tell the truth. Here's another one. Everybody knows the Good Samaritan parable. It's well known. So, I've been looking into that, and so here's this lawyer coming to talk to Jesus. What I realized for the first time, it's a Washington lawyer. May I know that tone of voice? All right, so what do I do to inherit eternal life? He's, well, I think it's written down. Love God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then love your neighbor as yourself. Right? Yeah. Well, okay, who is my neighbor? Not who is my neighbor. Exactly who am I obligated to respond to? Jesus said, well, let me give you an example. He picks a Samaritan. Now, let me be clear. To his Judean audience that Jesus was speaking to, there were no good Samaritans. They're a mixed race. They're half-breeds. They're dangerous. They're false worshipers. I mean, they're the people who travel in caravans from Mexico with, oh, that's a different group too. But they were othered, just like we hear people being othered today. Other the Samaritans. So here's this Samaritan who's being othered by the Judean community, and I learned Jewish scholars reminded me the man on the side of the road was a Jew, beaten, dead, half dead, lying there. And here's a man who has been othered, deciding to help somebody who's other to him. And he's Jesus' example of a neighbor. The Good Samaritan parable could save multiracial democracy. Who is our neighbor is the most important question. Oh, similarly, take the Galatians text. And I won't do them all here because I want to get into some of the questions. But Galatians 3:28. We all know that. So, no longer Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female. We're all one in Christ Jesus. We love that text. We love to preach that text. Because here we are, race, class, gender, the pillars of oppression and division. Always, in every situation, always race, class, and gender. Always there in some relationship. What I learned is that text, 3:28, was for the early church a baptismal formula. A baptismal rite. They read it at every baptism. Every baptism, early church, read this text. They're kind of saying, well, so we're followers of this, this brown-skinned Palestinian rabbi who told us we're supposed to overturn these divisions and these barriers and bring them down. We're not perfect. We're not always good at it, but that's our mission. It's core to who we are. We bring down barriers. That's what we do. That's what we do. And so if you don't want to be a part of that kind of group, you better go somewhere else. Because you wouldn't be happy with us, with this group. Guess what text in the Fisk University Museum of white slaveholder Bibles was taken out of every white slaveholder Bible? Galatians 3:28. It's called the abolitionist text back in the abolitionist days. These texts are all, I think, that could bring some of us back and carry some of us forward. Jesus says, "Blessed are the peace lovers." Right? Isn't that what he said? No. How about blessed are the peacekeepers? Let's keep the lid on, keep those emails down. No. Blessed are the peacemakers, which means the conflict resolvers. White Christian nationalists are conflict makers. In our whole polarized, it's never been more polarized than now in my whole lifetime, which is a long time, but probably not since the Civil War, which is a long time. How do we as peacekeepers go into the conflicts and try and make peace? I was just in my home state's Michigan. I've been there 4 times in the last 6 weeks. Big state, big important state for this election. So our lead clergyman, black clergyman there for voter protection, he's a good friend. He was in Lansing at a huge rally, white Christian nationalist rally. Hundreds of guys and their guns and their stuff. Little group of Christians trying to, and it was dangerous. It was kind of dangerous. And so there was an older pastor that he was there, and he wanted to walk the pastor to his car to make sure he's going to be okay. And he did, and got him in the car. And then he looked at this huge rally outside the state capitol of all these white Christian national flags, Confederate flags, Jesus signs, guns everywhere. And he walked into the crowd, a black man with a collar, all by himself. Walked in, walked up. Hey, what are you all doing here? Why are you here? Well, we were told we should come here, but why are you here? Are you afraid of me? Are you afraid of how I'll vote? I'd like to really understand why you're here. Let's talk a little bit. Surrounded. After a while, the flag came down. Talking began to ensue. He's still talking to those guys. That takes a lot of courage, right? Brittany Packnett tells us, if you want to join a Black Lives Matter demonstration and march with us and rubber bullets and tear gas. That's cool. And if you survive, you say, I was there. The harder thing for you white folks is to talk to your family and friends. That's more risk than joining a Black Lives Matter demonstration. So these texts, I think really could change the faith narrative. That's all I want to do. Let's have a different faith narrative, and let's talk about faith, what real faith means. What real faith means. And so we're accountable to these texts. Jesus says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do anything I say? Yeah, good question. So we finished a statement today called Christians and Democracy, put together by a handful of scholars, and it'll be released in the fall, and we'll have a big summit at Georgetown called A Summit on Faith and Democracy. We're doing everything we can do. We are booked all the way in battleground states, all the way through the election and beyond, because this won't be done with the election. There will likely be chaos, even violence afterwards, no matter who wins, and until the 20th of January, when somebody stands up to be inaugurated. We're in this Kairos moment. So how do we bring our faith to bear? How do we take our faith into our streets, our congregations, and how do we really, as James Lawson, who died just yesterday, did every day. He was at Selma. He trained John Lewis. He said, we just have to follow Jesus. We just have to follow Jesus. And as simple as that is, this is a Kairos time when we have to learn again just to follow Jesus. Amen.
Collecting questions. Thank you. I was aware as I was listening how desperately I long for heroes of the faith to speak. And I heard that resonance in what you were sharing. And it occurred to me that the people who are gathered here on this day are part of that echo.
Absolutely.
And so long to be able to harness that longing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how do we work with the persuadables? That's my question while we're gathering other questions. What's your best tip, Jim? We need tips.
As much as I love good journalism and follow it all the time, people aren't going to be just persuaded by watching the show or reading the article, or being us telling them that they're wrong and we're right and they're bad and we're good. Because the othering, I've been seeing lots of othering in all our scriptures, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, they're all against the othering. You can't other. You got to love our neighbor, even love our enemy. That's what he said. And we other each other all the time, but that goes really across media spectrums.
Yeah.
When do you hear we had a big event in Georgetown the other night to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Law, 64. And I was on this panel to think about that, and I said, this is no longer how much progress have we made. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Well, this is good, but that's over. No more incremental discussion. All of that from 64 is about to be overturned now. They're trying to overturn everything, and voting rights 65 too. And I'm still an activist, and for young activists who come see me, who want to blow up the system and not vote, and they're tired of the candidates and the system, and we'll have an election next time. I'd say no. No. You can't transform democracy unless you save it. Yeah. And those of us who are critical of those young people saying they might not vote in Michigan and Wisconsin, other places, those of us who are critical of them will tell them they should vote because it could get worse. No, we have to be as committed as they are to the transformation of democracy. And we have let democracy lie. Our liberal progressive selves, we kind of go along with it, being critical, but it needs fundamental transformation. And if we survive this election, we better commit to that like never before. So Eddie Glaude says stuff like, everything is about to fall apart, and everything is possible at the same time. That's where I think we are. So I want to find common space and common ground. Jim Lawson, who just died, he was in a lunch counter, and this white motorcycle guy came in with his big black jacket and spit in his face. Spit in Lawson's face. And Lawson looked at him and said, "Excuse me, but do you have a handkerchief?"
Wow.
And the guy was so stunned by that polite response,
Yeah.
he pulled out a handkerchief. Jim wiped his face off and said, Are you what kind of bike do you have? And Jim knew about bikes. And they had a good conversation about motorbikes after that incident. Okay? So I tell my students, don't go home and tell your parents they're wrong and stupid and they're paying for your college.
Yeah.
But tell them how you're changing. Tell them how you're rethinking, how you're finding some new things. And if you're Christians together or people of faith, talk about the text. Bishop Michael Curry, my dear friend in the Episcopal Church, keeps saying, go to the text, go to the text, go to the text. I want us to go to the text. And I'm going to, in the fall, I'm going to publicly debate some of these people about the text. They may or may not, but I want them to have to be accountable to the text. So let's have that conversation in Wheaton Chapel. Let's talk about the text. What does the text say? Jesus said this. You might think it means something else. What do you think it means? Don't just say single issue.
Right.
I mean, I got, there are people who say their single issue is abortion. Others say their single issue is Gaza. Single issue. That's not going to help us. How do we get to the text? So let's have a text conversation. What's your faith mean? What's my faith mean? And I think there are people who are confused, who are uncomfortable, and don't know quite what to think. And a lot of pastors kind of do know what to think and say, and they have to decide if they've got the courage to say it this fall. Pastors are the people who maybe have more chance, I would think about this, to speak to divided political audiences this fall than any other group in the country. The only place they come together is the church. I know pastors who are getting death threats from members of their congregations. But this is a time to not just talk courage, but take risk in showing courage. And I think that can move people. Like my friend who walked up to those white guys in the Capitol and just talked to them. They didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah. Kind of as a follow-up to that, there's a question, how do you convince nuns, N-O-N-E-S, to vote in November?
Cynicism is a tool of the powerful. It's a tactic to fuel cynicism, to cause people to withdraw and say, it makes no difference. They want to fuel that cynicism. So when we play into that cynicism, we're giving them exactly what they want. They want to prevent particular voices from being heard. And if you can't suppress their vote, you try and you just make them cynical. Make them think it doesn't matter. And Brittany Packnett, again, I quote her often, she was at Georgetown this fall, my students, and she were having this time together. And one of the students said that question, how can I have hope? You know, I mean, I don't want to be caricaturing, but I've been at this now for 18 months of my life, and it hasn't changed yet, you know. And here's what she said. She said, to not have hope is to betray my ancestors. A great-great-grandmother who kept 3 generations together during and after slavery. To not have hope is a betrayal of my great-grandmother. So don't talk to me about having hope. We've been through this, right? So it's about perspective and a longer-term perspective. But I'm finding that I'm being able to talk to a lot of young activists who were asking that question. And one the other night finally said, yeah, I've been wrestling with that, but I wish politicians listened and learned. And when they knew they were wrong, changed their minds. I don't see that much, but I'm going to keep expecting that from them by voting and holding them accountable.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another question. How do you talk about the role and the impact of women? The future is female, in quotes. We're entering a feminine millennia. God is female. How do you reconcile, you talk in your book about the intersectionality of injustice, and how about the role of patriarchy and how that is rearing its head as far as control of women and their bodies?
This student I just mentioned, she's a black queer woman at Georgetown. So she's kind of exemplified, and she's struggling with her faith because of all of that, right? And yet she hasn't given up on her faith. She's struggling with her faith. And one of my students, he's Iranian, and he's very smart, graduated from McCourt School of Policy. He can be making lots of money, but he wants to fight for his country, democracy in Iran.
Wow.
And he calls it the feminist movement in Iran. It's being led mostly by women who are in jail. And our vocational conversations these days, just last week, are when to go back and risk his life. And he names what's happening in Iran as a feminist movement for democracy in Iran.
And how about in the United States?
Well, one of the scholars that helped us write this statement is Christian Dumais, who wrote the book Jesus and John Wayne. And that's a book I commend to all of you. She does a very serious critique of that patriarchy, and that is right there in the Galatians text.
Yeah.
It's in the text. And so if we don't deal with race, gender, and class, and that's the emancipation text, and we have these conversations, in our house about the role of women in churches, even when they're pastors.
Even then.
but often not senior pastors or associate pastors, or it takes so long, or even when officially there's ordination, but the experience of so many women that are clergy that I talk to it's still a pretty serious struggle.
Yeah.
And even in churches where they've come down on the right side,
Right.
at other places they haven't.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, for white Christian nationalism, patriarchy is central to white Christian nationalism. It's just core, what the role of women should be
Yes.
in society, in the church, in the family. Patriarchy isn't talked about as much, but it is where they're talking to people. It's clear. Worship, music, testimony, patriarchy's core to white Christian nationalism.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question, and more on the horizon. Okay, thank you. Could you discuss more how white Christian nationalism combines sexual inequality with racial inequality, and how we as Christians offer another vision? You've spoken to that in your comments and just now.
Yeah. Joy Reid had this show that I got pulled onto about guns. And you remember it was a shooting where they were accusing an alleged trans shooter of being the shooter. And she wasn't the shooter, but so it was a whole attack on the trans community in the context of guns. And so I was on the show with this pretty powerful trans leader. And when I just said LGBTQ are initials that all stand for people who are beloved of God, it's like that was a moment of solidarity on the panel.
Yeah.
And that simple statement
Yeah.
is hard. It would be hard to, you could offend that, but it'd be hard to have a theological disagreement
One
with
would think.
what that is.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
that means we have to say it and
Yeah.
do it. And
Yeah.
and there are people who say and do it better and more than me.
Yeah, thank you. You challenged us to have the hard conversations. What's the first sentence of those conversations? That's a great question.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think I want to hear from people. Like I was at a university, a lot of students were there. It was university, but in a very conservative part of Pennsylvania. And the student in the Q&A time, at universities, students often get extra credit for going to lectures to get them out.
Yeah.
And usually when the time has come for that trip to run out, they leave. And they said, don't be afraid if they all leave because it's there. But nobody left. We were just all there for the whole time, 2 hours. This guy says, he stood up and says, I'm a white male. We said, oh, okay, thanks for telling us that. I'm a veteran. Okay. And I'm a Trump supporter. What do you do with me?
Wow.
And the president's there, and they're all worried about campus confrontations. And so I said, well, why are you going to vote the way, what are the values that make you want to vote the way you're thinking you're going to vote? What are the reasons, but more values? Why? And if you're a person of faith, what are those values that make you? And I said, he said, what do you do with me? I said, well, what do we do? We have a conversation like we're having right now. And you just started it. Thank you. You stood up and started, and we're having a conversation right now about what those values are. And he felt listened to, he felt heard. Now we time limited, but that we can have conversations with people. There are very few places in this country now where conversations are going on. That's my big concern. How do we find places to have conversations that aren't going on now?
And how do you imagine faith communities could facilitate that sort of conversation.
Yeah. I just did a pastor's guide for the book.
Oh, good.
For
Thank you.
how to preach these 6 texts in the fall. Because I think there needs to be small groups, conversations,
Yep.
studies, prayer groups, and it's got to get personal. Let me tell you a story. So the guy who's my executive director at the center, Jim Simpson, at the Center for Faith and Justice, his father and mother, they're Scottish Presbyterians, and his dad was assigned to a rural congregation in Georgia as a Scottish Presbyterian. Different culture than they're used to back in Edinburgh. And so Jim's mom is in the church choir, and they practice before service every Sunday morning. And at the end of the practice, the choir director says a prayer for the service. And the woman who's the choir director, she's not a militant or right-wing or anything. She's just really scared. And she says, Lord, please protect us from those cartels of immigrants coming with their diseases and their rapists and leprosy. And please, and those soldiers are, and the pastor's wife says, no, stop, that's not true, and we don't lie in church.
Whoa.
She said, I know you're afraid, I can feel your fear, and we can discuss those things. But those things aren't true, and we can have a conversation, but we can't lie in church, because that's not true.
Wow.
That was so more effective than if I'd have been there or something, you know? In your places of influence and authority and relationship, that's where it's often hardest to speak. How many times do you hear people say, we just stay away from politics? Don't. I'm saying don't. You can't. You can't stay away from politics. How you do it is important. How you do it relationally is important. Screaming and yelling back and forth is not the way to go. But we have to, she said what she felt in a moment she was in, and she went to her authority as a leader in that church.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Here's another question. How do you walk the line between knowing and loving your neighbor while also being clear and sober about white nationalist rhetoric when white nationalists are our neighbors?
Well, that's where we just threw in the statement,
Yep.
loving our enemies as well. Because if you don't have enemies, you're not really doing anything.
Oh, say more about that.
Jesus knew he had enemies, and let's bring it forward to King. Martin King Jr., Jim Lawson, they knew they had enemies. And they knew they were committed because of their faith in Jesus to love their enemies. But they weren't going to submit to their enemies' agendas and purposes and power. They were going to even risk themselves. But King really did believe that he wanted to win over his enemies, win over white people, and not just win against them. And there's a whole civil rights movement history that some of us were involved in about those conflicts. But you have to risk standing up to your enemies, but you have to really, like King struggled to do deep inside, how do we love our enemies even when they're spitting at you in the face?
Yeah. Thank you. Somebody's asking, what is the history of white nationalist religion?
Chapter 1 in the book. It's
Yeah.
no, it is a long history. The doctrine of discovery. There's a whole analysis of that history, the doctrine of discovery, to discover this country and to just commit near genocide of indigenous people. It was a doctrine of discovery with religious support for it. Yeah. It was the worst kind of religion. That's when I think on some days, better not even to have it, because it's been so ugly and brutal for so long. A black Episcopal bishop who's been a bishop for 15 years in the state was at our event last night, and he's a bishop in a mainline church. He's African American. He said, yeah, I try to be ecumenical and all that, but given our history, what I would say to oppressed people when Christianity comes in, look out.
Yeah.
Get out of the way. Now, he's clergy, he's bishop, but he's saying, this is our history. Mm-hmm. So, and repentance from sin, American original sin, doesn't mean feeling guilty or sorry. That's easy. You go home and watch your binge TV show afterwards. Repentance means turning around and going in another direction. In Islam and Judaism and Christianity, repentance means turnabout, radical turnabout, and go in a different direction. And what would it mean if people like us who are worried about democracy this fall can help to prevent the worst from happening? What would it mean for us to, this time, say, repentance from a skewed democracy? It leaves so many people outside, off the table, away. Would mean turning around. What would it mean to turn our democracy around? Not just gentle, slow improvements, gerrymandering commissions, all that's good. But we can't tell a lot of young people who are cynical about voting they should vote unless we are committed to turning democracy around. And that's what I think this moment could be for us. So I think we're in a position where things could turn in ways that we've never quite imagined in recent times, but they also could turn around in ways that they haven't for a long time. To me, that's this Kairos piece. I don't want to go back to usual. I don't want to go back to democracy under Biden or Obama. We've got to do better than all that going forward.
So you talked about in your book the hush circles where people who were enslaved worshipped away from folks who had the power. What are you saying?
Hush harbors. No, I love that you brought that up.
I did, because I liked it. But where is that happening now?
Well, but let's look at that. Let's look at that. So here's the papal bulls and the slaveholder Bibles and the teaching slaves the book, but you don't want them to be able to read the book, right? Because they might find something in the book that would inspire their liberation. So in the middle of all that, slaves secretly took off from their white slave masters to places we call hush harbors, where slaves themselves, away from their masters, learned how to read the Bible, talked about the Bible, did underground railroads, and the hush harbors were the beginning of the black church in America. The hush harbors were the beginnings of what became the black churches in America. Now, think about this. What church in America, which of our churches in America has had most impact on the rest of the world? Clearly, the black churches. I mean, Presbyterians probably too, but
or United Methodists.
Probably too.
Yeah.
Lutherans, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But think about that. If the black churches have had most impact around the world, the American church that has most impact around the world started in hush harbors in the margins, on the edges. What does that say about who our God is?
Yeah.
And where our God looks, and who our God seeks out. So to me, the Hush Harpers are a wonderful story. And to the future, the last chapter of the book is called The Remnant Church. It's bringing up Dietrich Bonhoeffer in the 1930s and his confessing church. I think there's a new generation, even of some white believers, some younger white believers. I'm doing podcasts with the post-evangelicals, the new evangelicals. I'm waiting for the adjacent evangelicals, and there are all these young people who are trying to find their way to something new, and many of them are ready to join in support of the leadership of brown and black church leaders in America, and together create literally a new American church. Not just be against white Christian nationalism, but literally we have to create in this country a new American church, which I'm just calling a remnant church.
Thank you. Yes. Two more questions. Okay. All right, is that good? Yeah. All right, Jerry's in charge. We got this.
I've learned that.
Yeah, I know. We are blessed by that because there will be book signing. What are your ideas? How about, briefly, about getting people fired up about doing something specific about Christian nationalism rather than saying, ain't it awful?
Yeah, it's about showing up. There's 10 commitments at the end, next steps, practical things. It's about showing up. We have to show up. And also show up in places where we don't often go. Not just show up with our friends and say, aren't they terrible? Did you hear the latest thing he said? Oh my God. We've got to figure out how to take conversation to places where we're not comfortable either. And maybe we don't have all the answers either. And American politics is often governed by extremes on all sides. And many American people aren't really at those places. And they want to find, and I am anything but a centrist, that's for sure. When I say don't go right, don't go left, go deeper, I mean go deeper than politics. And somehow we've got to stop just talking to ourselves. We've got to find how we can have conversations and take it like my friend did. Steve Bland, black minister, took it to them. Where, not just scurrying around them again to chin at them, but to talk to them. What does that look like for us, for all of us? How do we figure out where the family relationships, the congregational relationships, where are the places where we can talk, and bring it for at least for people of faith, talking to other people of faith, bring it all back to faith. Not politics, bring it all back to faith.
So I have the last question, which is as it should be, I think. Which is, what is it about Jesus? What is it about Christianity? Apart from the structures that have been so oppressive, what is it about the gospel that has caused you to create a life of advocacy and worship, I would say?
I left my church as a teenage kid, or it left me or something. And when I was organizing in Michigan, a student, I was very secular. And I just went back to preach at a church right next to the Capitol, where I went to school. And, we were all reading, Marxism and anarchism. We switch off different nights, And we had just shut down the university and taken, all these people to Washington. And I had decided that I wanted to be an activist. I wanted to change things, but I needed a foundation for that. And I was not satisfied, finally, by Che Guevara, Ho Chi Minh, and Karl Marx. Good analysis, but I didn't think that was. And so that's when I discovered this text, this Matthew 25 text. There's a whole chapter in the book on that, my conversion text. And Jesus is literally saying, I call it the "it was me" text. I was hungry, meaning I had 3 jobs and I still needed food stamps. And they cut them again. That was me. I was thirsty, and I'm a mother in Flint, and I can't get clean water for my kids, and asbestos poisoning, and the white moms in the suburbs are doing fine. Jesus, that was me. Yeah. Or I couldn't grow food anymore on my land in Guatemala because of climate change. So, and these gangs wanted my son to be a boy soldier, and if I didn't allow that, they're going to gang rape my daughter. So we packed up all our stuff we could carry on our backs. We were like naked strangers, and we walked to America, where we were told they would give us asylum. And they put us in cages, and our kids in different cages. Jesus saying, that was me. I was there. I was sick. I was in prison. It was me. Nothing that radical in the radical stuff I was reading. That was the most radical thing I ever had heard, never heard at my church. Most radical thing. And I said, that's what I want. That's the Jesus I want to follow. That's what could change me and change everything. The economics of Jesus turn the world's politics upside down. Yeah. And I think that's what draws me. But in a moment like this, though, I will say another thing about Jesus and hope. And I'll just very briefly, my new chair at Georgetown is wonderfully named after my dear mentor and friend, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And he taught me my theology of hope, really. I learned a lot about that in South Africa. And I remember he taught me the difference between optimism, which is a feeling or a mood or a personality type, cup half empty, cup half full. He said, no, hope is not a feeling or a mood, it's a decision you make because of this thing that we call faith. Yeah. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, says Hebrews, the evidence of things not seen. And I'll just briefly end with a quick story. My first day in South Africa, way back in the day, I was going at the invitation of the South African churches, and I'm in St. George's Cathedral, and he's convening in Cape Town, and the government had canceled a rally. So he said, well, we're going to have church. So hundreds of military on the outside, hundreds, all fully armed. He begins to speak inside the cathedral, and the front doors of St. George's are broken open with the South African security police. Came into his place on the walls. And these are thugs. I would later learn about these guys. And they're holding tape recorders and notepads as if to say, go ahead, you just got out of prison. Yeah. Be prophetic. Yeah. We'll write it down. It's my first day there, and I felt they were saying to him and to us, we own this country. We own this cathedral. We own you. We own your God. He stopped talking, he bowed in prayer. You know, little guy, long flowing robes, looking like Yoda, you know. And he's quiet, and we're wondering what in the world is he going to say? And we're all just terrified. We're surrounded. Yeah. And he finally looks up and he says, you're very powerful. You're very powerful, but you're not God's. And I serve a God who will not be mocked. Wow. So, he begins bouncing like a good Baptist preacher. So, remember, we're surrounded. So, since you've already lost, we invite you today to come and join the winning side.
That's
And young people leapt out of their seats and they danced into the streets, and we just followed them.
yeah.
This is chanting dance that they do. And all these military people are confronted by dancing worshipers who weren't afraid. And 10 years later, I'm at the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. Guess who's master of ceremonies? Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I said, Bishop, do you remember that day in St. George's? He smiled. I said, today they've all joined the winning side, because everybody in South Africa on that day had always been against apartheid, right? And he said, he smiled. I said, and he taught me this: our trajectory, people of faith, is faith sparks hope, causes action to make change. Faith, hope, action, change. That's our faith trajectory. But I realized, standing there with 150,000 South Africans hearing Nelson Mandela speak, tears running down our faces, as wonderful it is to be at the party, that was a party, people of faith aren't the ones most needed at the party. We're needed back at St. George's, when you can only see the party through the eyes of faith. That's where we're needed, to see the party. So I believe in a beloved community. I believe in a multiracial democracy. I believe that someday we may feel and see that party, or my kids will. I don't know. But now we are surrounded, and you're going to feel surrounded in these 5 months. I'm going to feel surrounded. Noise, ugliness, violence, bad polling, bad candidates. We're going to feel surrounded. And I think I want you to, when you feel surrounded, I want you to hear Archbishop Desmond Tutu whispering